Scotland's my favourite part of England. There's a phrase that I've been taunted with before. Now, if you've clicked through, then you probably know that Scotland's not part of England precisely because of events that happened around here at the Battle of Bannockburn. But what if the English had won that battle? That's a question that I'm asking today. So if you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then click the subscribe button at the bottom right of the screen and ring the notification bell to be told when I upload new videos. In the meantime, let me introduce you to some experts. The Bannockburn Heritage Centre is a place of reflection. Men who risked their lives. Men who gave their lives. It's a hell of a thing, whatever the conflict. We come here to reflect on the outcome of a seminal battle that kept our little nation alive. How would the history of these islands be different if King Edward's army had never turned homeward to think again? Today, I'm going to the King Robert Hotel next to the Bannockburn Heritage Centre to meet up with two eminent Scottish historians and wonderful people to ask them the question, what if the English had won the Battle of Bannockburn? Fiona Watson is an historian and writer specialising in the Anglo-Scottish Wars. Her new novel, Lies of the Flesh, set just after the Battle of Bannockburn, will be out in September 2024. Martin McGregor is Senior Lecturer in Scottish History at Glasgow University. And he was part of the Robert Bruce Facial Depiction Project published in 2016. I'll leave links in the comments to both these wonderful people's work. What an appropriate place to talk about that very battle, because I wanted to get you two together today to talk about the question of what if, perish of thought, what if the English had won at the Battle of Bannockburn? Because obviously we are Scottish, but the staff are English.
Get on.
So, to start us off, let's talk about how did the Battle of Bannockburn come about?
Well, Robert Bruce has been going places after a difficult start, shall we say, to his kingship, but he's been the last few years successfully fighting a civil war, which he had to do given the profound divisions which his seizing of the throne engendered in the Scottish political community. But he's also been engaged in unpicking the English hold on Scotland, which has meant attacking English strong points, castles, fortified towns, etc. And that's been going very well. There's very few places left in Scotland where the English still have control. Stirling is one of them, so it's part of the end game as far as Bruce is concerned in completing this.
There must be parts of the island Skye that the English have got a stronghold.
No, nowhere like that. No, that's sacrosanct territory, you know.
I was making an anachronistic reference to the current day.
Sassenach and the Isle of Skye, etc. No, so Stirling is one of the castles that is holding out, and of course it's strategically one of the most important, if not the most important, castles in Scotland, so it's still got its English garrison. Bruce in October 1313 says to his Scottish opponents, okay, you've got a year...
Can I stop you there for a second, right? So Stirling's got an English garrison.
Well,
how did they get supplied?
It's actually a Scot who's in charge.
Sir Philip.
Right, okay.
There are lots of anti-Bruce Scots as well.
Right. So how, as Bruce has taken control, and taken more and more strongholds, castles, how did he get supplied at Stirling?
That's a good question. I guess the sea routes in the east are still functioning to a degree, but it's just becoming... Edinburgh's taken in early 1314. There's Roxburgh, which is next to go, you know, and there's really only Bothwell after that. So we're down to the Edward II is holding on by his fingernails, shall we say, and he ultimately is honour bound to come in and try and relieve the castle of Stirling, you know, if he's going to have anything to hold on to in Scotland at all. So that's essentially the setup for Bannockburn.
What you were about to say is really important to understanding the context of Bannockburn.
Yeah, October 1313, Bruce says to his opponents, you know, you've got a year to come into my peace, or else you're going to be forfeited. So that kind of sets a timeline on it, and I think as far as Edward II is concerned, therefore, you know, he has to act. His hand is forced, and he's not been very impressive so far in terms of acting in Scotland.
Yeah, but when you say his opponents, that's his Scottish opponents.
It's his Scottish opponents. That's
And I
right.
do
Yeah. Yeah. They will be forfeited, if they do not come into his
Because
piece.
the idea of
Yeah.
Scottishness and Englishness and all that kind of stuff is not quite the same as today, is it?
Oh, I think it's what Bruce has done that's made the difference
Yes.
by murdering John Conn of Badenoch back in 1306. All those Scots who had been at the forefront of the fight against England were now forced onto the English side because he'd killed the head of their family. So, no, I think it's actually more... if we can talk about identity, and yes, it is obviously different than what it is now, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking people who had no choice but to fight against Bruce.
Right, okay.
But Bruce has been very successful, I would say, in winning Scots over in the interim as well. Success has been his. He's been conducting a remarkable, military campaign by any standards, and that's going to bring people over.
Yeah. And he gives them an ultimatum. You've got a year to come into my piece.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And Stirling's sitting there
Yep.
waiting. The last piece in the chessboard
Almost.
for Edward.
Almost the last piece, but very, very significant piece indeed. So I think if Edward's going to have anything to play for in Scotland, then he's got to come north now.
Now, I often tell the story to as a tour guide about Robert the Bruce's brother,
Oh,
Edward.
no. Edward Bruce. The fall guy.
And I know what you're going to say, but this is what I want to bring this out.
He was behaving chivalrously, of course,
About this whole thing. Just in case there are people at home that haven't
I've heard,
been
yes,
on a dodgy Scottish tour. So this idea that Edward when they're besieging Stirling Castle, Edward strikes a deal with the captain of the castle, right? That if it's handed over by Midsummer's Day, 1314, then we'll say no more about it.
If Edward doesn't come to leave it by midsummer, then he'll hand it over.
So I got that the wrong way around, yeah.
Yep.
And it saves a lot of kind of people hanging about doing the siege thing and all that kind of thing. Are you telling me?
I am.
that
Well,
didn't happen?
the story goes that Edward Bruce makes this deal with Sir Philip Newby, the garrison commander at Stirling, and that Robert Bruce is very upset with his brother for doing this. And it's partly because there's a misreading, because it's supposed to have been a whole year, but it's not. It's only about a 6-week period, which is normal for that kind of arrangement. But the point about that arrangement, we already know that Edward II is coming. The Scots know this.
Yes.
He's been preparing since the previous winter. But what that does is Robert Bruce is saying, this is where we're going to fight.
Yes.
This is Edward will have to come up and relieve Stirling by midsummer.
You'll have to pass
come
here where we are now
Exactly
in order
here.
to get to Stirling.
Exactly. So Robert Bruce has chosen the battleground.
Yes.
So there's absolutely no way that Edward Bruce did anything that his brother didn't want.
Yeah. But I thought it was interesting.
Carefully
to get
planned.
that.
Carefully planned.
Yeah. I was just pretending to be an idiot.
Very convincing, Bruce, yeah.
It's acting, my dear friend. So, one way or another, the point is that effectively Robert the Bruce has given Edward II an ultimatum of one sort or another, that you need to come and relieve Stirling Castle. Come and have a go if you think they're hard enough. Right? If you think you really have if you've got any chance of controlling Scotland, you've got to come and do this.
Yes.
Yeah?
Although that is maybe presupposing that Robert Bruce had absolutely 100% intended to fight a battle, because I'm not sure that that's necessary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So tell me, do.
Well, obviously, what the Scots do is they park themselves literally in the new park, the hunting reserves of the Kings of Scots, which sits between the Roman road, which Edward will take from Falkirk, and Stirling Castle. So the Scots are sitting there. Now, it's not 100% clear the order of things, but we get this, probably the first engagement is, the De Boon episode where the guy may or may not have come out of the English lines, seen the king.
Of course he did.
Yes, of course he did. I like that.
And I've made a video about 2 alternative stories to De Boon. And so anyone that wants to watch that will be able to click top right,
Good.
will be able to come back and I'll click through and they'll get to see the De Boon.
Did you do it? Did you have the axe and everything?
No, I was sitting in my living room.
Oh, you weren't sitting on your little
I
horse.
was sitting, no. Right, so the De Boon thing happened
Definitely
the night
happened.
before.
Right, so this is the first day of the battle where Robert Bruce has his tactics. He's dug pits so that the English horse can't go very far round the Scots. They have to come on a narrow front, which is what he's learned from reading up about battles that infantry armies have won in the past. So he's done all of that, and then the infantry, after De Boon, the vanguard does, not the infantry, the English cavalry, ride at him. The Scots win again. Probably then there's a sort of a sneaky thing where Clifford and Beaumont, two English knights who know this area, they try to go round and behind the Scots.
And this is all the night before what will become
the day before.
the day before.
There's 2 days we're talking about, so it's the first day of Bannockburn. It's the first day of Bannockburn.
It could have been the only day. That's the point. So the Scots have done very well. That's kind of 3-0. To the Scots, and at that point the English decide they need to get water.
But these are 3-0 in skirmishes.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's not a pitched battle.
Yeah.
Now there's a very heavy suggestion that the way that Bruce had positioned himself was to make sure that he had an escape route to the west, which of course is where he's most comfortable. So that if he had not necessarily decided to take it any further. Technically, the English had relieved Stirling Castle by this point because they're within 3 miles.
Ah!
So Edward didn't have to physically go up to pay his money and go in.
Yeah, so it's like the old days where a try was just in order to get a conversion opportunity in rugby. You know how you used to, back in the day, that's why it's called a try in rugby, because when you put it down over the line, that gave you the opportunity to kick for goal. And you only got the points when you converted the try into...
Well, that makes sense, actually.
Right?
Yeah.
So I hadn't known that...
I didn't go to a rugby
You
playing
get within... I went to Perth High School, wasn't it? But see, when you're a wee fat lad, your options are limited. But the point is that I didn't getting within 3 miles of Stirling Castle. That was enough.
It was already relieved. Yes.
Right.
But we get to the end of day 1, as it turns out to be, you
Yes.
know, and as Fiona says, you know, the Scots are not necessarily committed to any more than that. You know, they've done well in the first day, and what the sources suggest is that it was the coming across the Scottish side of a Scot who was in the, you know, in Edward's army effectively, with intelligence that morale, etc., on the English side was very, very poor, that persuaded the Scots to persuaded Bruce to go for a day 2, which was then won decisively. You know,
But I'm putting myself in the position of Robert Bruce, and somebody who's been in Edward's army comes across in the middle of the night and goes, "Listen, mate, I've got some intelligence for you." Why do I believe him?
Well, it's
If
Sir
I-
Alexander
you know,
Seton.
spy.
It's not just anybody. You know, it's somebody who's known, and somebody who a number of years before had joined up with 2 other men to make to make a bond, you know, supporting Bruce as well. You know, so it's not like this is some nobody who's just come across. You know, I think
it's somebody that's on the other side now, and is
it's come across and is
Yeah.
providing this valuable information.
Yeah.
You know, but it maybe that's not the sole factor. It may be that Bruce, you know, is thinking about the options here, and he's aware, well, day 1 has gone as well, you know. So, I mean, it wouldn't just be a case of saying it all rests upon this, but it could be clinching testing,
Yeah, exactly.
clinching evidence,
Exactly.
I think, yeah.
Okay, so it's half time. The Scots are 3-0 up, but you're saying technically the English have already technically relieved. They're not in the
And
castle.
Edward II's told this. He doesn't actually have to go any further.
So why? 2 questions come. Why don't the English just go? There you go. We've won. And B, what would it have taken for them to get to the position where he goes? That's it. We've won.
Edward II. Oh well, I think he kind of felt, well, we've come all this way.
We might as well have a
Might as
battle.
well have that. No, and because they never see Robert Bruce. Robert Bruce never comes out to take them on. So the fact that the Scots army is right there.
And he's been out the first morning, of course,
Yes,
you know,
yes,
in front
sorry,
of his
before-
army.
before-
He's been
before
very
this
visible.
campaign.
Yeah,
But before this campaign, you know, the English never saw him.
in terms
he
of
disappeared.
the Scottish Earth
Yeah,
policy.
Yeah, he just, I mean, quite rightly, he's learned the lesson that William Wallace
Yeah.
didn't learn, you know, which is just to let them come in.
I don't
and
think
then
you
go
bring an
later.
army that massive all of that way and then just decide on a technicality that we can now
Yeah.
kind of depart the scene, you know, and I don't think that would have worked in terms of, you know, Bruce either, you know. So I think there has to be some kind of resolution to affairs. Either the Scots back off at the end of that night, or we go on to a proper, you know, we resolve the battle. You know,
Yes.
so I don't think there's any other option.
And so you're saying Seaton coming across is key
Well, it's
to
important.
that decision.
Yeah, it might have clinched the decision as far, but they've won day one, by a distance.
Yeah.
That must give. And this is a Bruce military machine which has been running very effectively for a number of years now. He's got a cohort of key generals as well. He has got a very, very well organised military force. I think he must be backing himself in this scenario after day one to say, and as Fiona was saying, the Scots have they know the terrain, they've got everything planned out, in terms of fighting a battle. Why not go?
And
Why
he
not
has
go
his
for
battle
it?
tactics. He's dug his trenches for the first day. He didn't use them, but that's by the by. He's also trained his men to be a movable Schultrum. Now, that doesn't mean you move when you're attacking. You get down and put your spears out. But it means that as a general, he can deploy the Schultrums to the parts of the field where he feels they're the most useful, whereas Wallace couldn't because he roped them in. Once they were there, they weren't going anywhere.
Yeah.
So he's done that. There were two other things that night Bruce repeatedly told his men. And that says, it'll tell you a lot about Scottish warfare. First of all, you're not allowed to take any prisoners.
Ooh.
Secondly, you're not allowed to take any booty until we've won. And it's that discipline which I think makes Bruce stand out as one of the best Scottish, any general. He has absolute control over this army. And normally they would be, look, there's an important guy over there. You can tell by the way he's dressed and his horse and what have you. Let's go get him.
Yeah.
And so the discipline would almost immediately break down. Bruce wasn't having none of that.
I think
How do
generalship
you
is key.
explain
here.
Marmaduke de Twing? Or whatever his name is.
Because he's been at Stirling Bridge and he's cut himself
So
back through the bridge.
Does
And
he not?
he's at Bannockburn
Yeah,
as well.
but he's at Bannockburn as well.
Yeah.
So he's taken prisoner.
Yeah, and he's
Right, so-
related to Bruce in the Yorkshire
Yeah.
Bruce family.
Yeah.
If it's like no prisoners.
No, well, I mean, one needs to
until
maybe
they've won.
one needs to
Until
be
they've
careful
won.
about that, I suppose, because in the rout many English are captured, and Bruce is very, very magnanimous in his treatment of the English captives.
Well, some of them anyway, yeah.
Well,
But-
I think that's compared to
but
contemporary
Twang-
scene in Europe.
Twang was-
He really stands out in this
He was-
regard.
He did, and Twang was personal to him. He knew him. He was related to his family in Yorkshire.
There's other English prisoners who are sent back with no ransom or anything
Clifford,
demanded.
I think.
Bodies are returned.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Clifford
that's
was
right.
too.
So I mean, I think that's
But
striking.
what's fascinating is that the Earl of Gloucester, who's Bruce's his son, his father. His grandfather was married into the Gloucester family, so they are also related. But the Earl of Gloucester had the previous night in the English army. He'd said, "Look, the foot soldiers have again marched a very long way. Maybe we should have a bit of a rest." And he was accused of cowardice. So he then was part of the vanguard, the front row that went in against the Scottish Schultrums on the second day, and he was killed. And Gloucester is a big, big scalp, and that shows you the control Bruce had. Because if anyone had got him as a captive.
Yeah.
I think this discipline and
Yeah.
tactics are either crucial. Another aspect of this is the way that Bruce has got a kind of division of kind of West Highland warriors in reserve as well, which he uses in the latter stages to complete the rout and to complete the victory. So it's this sense of a general who knows all of the pieces on the chessboard and is capable of deploying them at the right time, and that he knows that they will do what they're told as well. So it's just a tremendous military. That's why he wins the battle. But we're concerned with why he loses the battle.
This is the question: is there any way that the English could have won the battle?
Not with Edward II in charge.
With Edward II and with Bruce in charge of respective
Exactly.
armies, no,
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't
Yeah.
think. I think the outcomes.
Yeah. Well,
Oh, go on.
that kind of mucks up this video, doesn't it?
But ask us about the aftermath, and we might disagree, possibly, or the what if,
Yeah.
what if the English had lost? The English had won.
One, yeah.
Yeah, well, okay, yeah. What if the English had won? How? Because we sing about it at Murray.
I was going to say,
do you know
well,
what I mean?
if the English had won, what would we have sung?
Exactly.
What would we sing?
But it's such, and I always say this, and I don't know about the younger generations. You know the younger generations.
Oh, yeah.
I remember them
But
well.
I
man.
know myself. I remember growing up with the stories of Robert the Bush and the Spider, and this is such a seminal place to us, and we all look back to this moment. Was it such a defining moment? Could things, how might things have been different if that didn't go?
If the English had won.
Yeah.
If the English had won.
Well, the thing is, when it came to 2014 for the anniversary, 700th anniversary, and we were touted around various radio programmes and what have you, I was scratching my head to think of very much that Bannockburn actually achieved. A lot of the history books, including some very, very good ones that have been very influential, they skirt straight from Bannockburn almost to 1328 and the peace treaty. There's 14 years.
Yes.
And it's a stalemate. So actually, it's just as, because actually Bruce didn't get a peace treaty, he didn't get a final peace, he was still having to think of ways to try to bring Edward II to the negotiating table to make terms on Bruce's terms, to make peace on Bruce's terms, which was an independent Scotland recognition of, and Bruce's right to be king. Because of that, he didn't get that. So if you swap it the other way around and say, what if Edward II had won? He would have garrisoned a lot of Scotland. But in the end, Bruce would have undone it the way he'd done it before.
Yeah.
I think that things had actually gone too far for this to be a meaningful sort of what if, in a sense. That if Edward had won, he still wouldn't have had the kind of base off which to work in Scotland, because Stirling was almost the last anyway. So how do you kind of recreate control? A basis for control, given that Bruce, I think the Scots would have regrouped, etc., etc. There's no way that things would have fallen apart on the Scottish side.
Except if Bruce had been killed. That's the only what if. That's the ultimate what if.
I think that even then things had gone too far,
Maybe.
and I don't think everything was dependent upon Bruce in terms of the kind of keeping the Scottish initiative going. I think it had gone beyond it. It had gone beyond Bruce in a sense as well. I think.
Okay, two questions come from that, and one is who would have taken over from Bruce,
Edward.
and it.
In terms of
Sorry,
succession.
sorry.
Succession at that stage, it's Edward Bruce would have.
And because we're both very formidable characters, but the question is, would Edward have, been the same leader that Robert had been? Secondly, the second question was, given the momentum that was gained from Bruce's victory over De Boon, if Bruce had been killed at that point, before, in the first of all these interactions, how might that have played? Would that have changed the?
The Scots would have retreated.
Well, I wonder. That would have been, Bruce. That's an extraordinary incident, and the fact that Bruce is willing to trust in himself and put himself on the line to that extent, and you can imagine the Philip again. That's probably a reason, for thinking about the psychology of the whole thing and why the Scots go on to do that. But I think that the Scottish.
If he dies at that point,
But he's supposedly got a right. Off.
Yeah, of course, from his own generals. But would the Scots not have had contingencies in place to kind of allow for a scenario like that? Everything was very, very carefully planned. And my inkling is that the Scots would have continued. That they would not have just abandoned the scene just because their king had gone. I think that Bruce is key. It's a key individual, but I don't know if he's necessarily kind of the key to continuing and having success in the battle.
If you think about what Bruce in 1308, when they were fighting the civil war against the Commons, the family of the man he'd murdered, Bruce was very ill and reputedly dying. And the Earl of Buchan, who's John Comyn, Earl of Buchan, when they heard that Bruce, he was kind of basically carried onto the battlefield, when they heard that, all his men vamoosed. Bruce was iconic and talismanic in my book. And I think in the first instance they would have regrouped, they would have gone off, they would have made Edward Bruce king, and they would have come back. I don't think in the end it would.
No, not necessarily. I think 1307 is different from 1314 as well, because that's a lot of water under the bridge, and the kind of stability in a sense in terms of the military structures, the command structure, etc., is pretty impressive by that point in time. One thinks of the iconic declaration of Arbroath, and what Arbroath is really arguing in a sense is that the cause of freedom goes up and go above and beyond as it were the personage of the king.
Yes.
If Bruce were to kind of betray,
if
it does indeed, and I disagree, Fiona. I absolutely disagree. I think that
why it said it.
I think there were, but I think that what that is effectively saying is that the cause will not go away just because Robert Bruce sort of fails to kind of fulfil it. And I think you can take that forward into Bannockburn circumstance and say, things are going to continue here. That's the essential point of Arbroath, is to say, whatever happens, we are not going to go away. And I think that's the underlying truth of the War of Independence, is that Scotland was by now too well established to go away. And it was actually too well established for the English to achieve a conquest of it and to kind of allied it in those terms. All of the what-ifs kind of fade away, I think, in that sense.
I think there's broad agreement between you both.
Yeah, for sure.
So what we're saying is, the English had no chance all along.
Yes, that's what we're saying. What were you thinking?
Sometimes there are no twists of history. Sometimes it's inevitable.
Oh dear. That's not a word historians like.
Don't use the I word.
That's us redundant.
Hey, shut it, I'm winding up. Normally it's on these moments that history turns, but in this case, there was an inevitability that Scotland was going to last forever. Anyway, listen, it's been great chatting to Fiona and Martin. Here's the thing, what if William Wallace had never been captured before this stage? There's a question for you, and it just so happens that we made a video about that. And if you want to see it, just click the link to the video coming up on screen now. If you want to support the channel, then click top right to become a Patreon member, or buy me a coffee in the description below. In the meantime, I'm Ian Dawkins, going to be Lamb Ally. Sherry and Rasta.